to and some of the posts knocked down, but nothing of great distress. And so he began to also look at one side of the fence and the other, so he could get a good idea of when they do graze, what's the situation, and when they can't, what's the situation. So he's in the midst of doing that work right now. Yes, there's a question.
I was just wondering what the logic was behind attempting to put these, making an attempt at keeping them there when all the arguments seem to point to the fact that they shouldn't be there in the first place.
Okay, the question was, what's the logic behind keeping them there when evidence is showing that they really shouldn't be there and should be moved out? And the logic behind that is, it's a very good question, is for now it's to make that impairment determination. So we have to have evidence to begin to make that determination, and then to what degree that impairment is occurring, and then from there we'll take action.
But aren't they genetically modified organisms to begin with? So.
And the question is, aren't they genetically modified? Yes, they are. And so what we're doing is we'll start with that to begin to tell us our time frame, and then also what Evan is doing, and he's also experimenting with and understanding where these bison are, and then how could we best use their patterns of movement to move them out. So we're looking at it all together, and in the meantime, the group of collaborators are then trying to decide, okay, once we start, we get all this lined out, then we need to take action. What are we going to do? So that's all coming together. Yes.
If they leave during certain times of the year, that's the time I would think to keep them out for good.
Correct. And so the question, or the statement was, if they leave at a certain time of the year, that's the best time to keep them out. And what we're finding is they're not leaving. And then secondly, and experimenting with the fencing, how many people have seen the fence line that separates the park from the forest over on the North Rim? And what kind of condition is that in? It's terrible, and it's a very dense forest. All it takes is a down tree and it's down again. And the expense of putting in a bison fence across there would just be enormous. So what we're trying to do is get an idea of what's it going to take to move them out, what will it take to keep them out, and then for the Forest Service and the Game and Fish is, what do you do with over 350 head of bison, especially when the Forest Service is looking at the agreement said 75 to 95 out in House Rock Valley. So what do you do? So that's all being discussed right now and trying to come up with alternatives and what's going to happen, and then who's going to pay for it.
How did the graduate student determine the percentage of disturbance, like in that picture, was caused by buffalo and what percentage was caused by elk and deer and sheep and other creatures?
Okay, so the question is, how did the student determine whether the impact that's there was caused by bison versus elk, deer, or other critters? Well, first of all, there's no elk on the North Rim, so we can eliminate that. Somebody had to clear their throat. Okay, I'm going to say there's no permanent elk that reside on the North Rim. Except for those that these guys shoot at, right? And as far as what he does is he actually has a camera, a film, and so this whole thing is filmed over time, so he can see what animals are there. So he has that in each one of his plots. So, and then the other question that had come up was, what about the cattle grazing? And what we do know is that the North Rim Ranches that has the allotment in that area is not grazing in this area right now. They're actually further to the north. They're not in this pasture area. And so we know that. And he also placed these plots in places where he would go, and he has people who then measure and collect the data on a weekly basis. Next question, yes.
Are they more destructive because they're hybrid than they would be if they were real buffalo?
Not necessarily, no. And actually what the cattle part of them does is kind of just, I'm going to say, basically kind of makes them more domesticated type, or, you know, kind of slower than the more wild type that have a little bit of different patterns, but basically and that's what Buffalo Jones was trying to get at, is something to be able to herd them a little more. But that you can't even really tell much difference in. So no, they pretty much act like bison.
I have a question.
Yes.
Well, you mentioned a fence between the park and the forest. What's the purpose of that fence?
It's a boundary fence, and it was put in many years ago, and it just is a mark between the forest boundary and the park boundary.
And so does it interfere with?
Yeah, some of it's been replaced over time, yes.
Does that interfere with animal migrations?
No, it's pretty much it's not even as high as that. It's like half the post size of that. And in some places it's also a pole type fence. Yes.
You seem to be taking a lot of responsibility for your agency. The game and fish, it's their animals, they shouldn't be, and I understand they have deep pockets, so they buy ranches, etc. And so why can't they put the fence at whatever expense it costs?
Well, actually in the state there's a fence law that it's basically you have to fence out. So the owner fences out the animal. So that means as the owner we have to fence out. Yeah. And the question was, if you didn't hear it, why doesn't the game and fish, since it's their animals, why don't they take the cost of putting up a fence? Thank you. So, you know, we also had just in January, we brought together interest folks, people who have scientists, some of the folks who guide hunters in the area, game and fish, Forest Service, and so forth. We brought a group of folks together to begin to understand other knowledge, what other information do people have, and so that we could collect that. We're going to combine that with Evan's work, and this spring, the Park Service will start on the impairment assessment based on the information and data. And then from there, we'll create a determination for the superintendent. And at that point, it will actually become a public process where people then we will provide alternatives of what we want to do in decreasing or eliminating the impairment. And so the public will have an opportunity to comment on that. And then from there, in this working group, the Game and Fish and the Forest Service, and we'll begin to look at, okay, now how do we go about resolving this based on this determination? Yes?
So all of the buffalo in Arizona, in 2 different herds, are all Cattalo. They all have cattle blood in them.
Cattle genes in
DNA.
We have somebody here from the
I
Game
guess
and Fish.
and just provide a little more background on that. 98% of the bison in North America have some level of cattle genes in them. And there's only 2 herds in the country that are quote unquote genetically pure. One of those is Wing Caves National Park, and the other one is Yellowstone National Park. And so, you know, there's been some cattle influence in all those over the years.
So the question was, for everyone to hear is, so are the herds in Arizona, do they have cattle genes in them? And the answer is yes. And then the further answer is that 98% of the bison in the United States have cattle genes, and that Wind Cave and Yellowstone have the least amount, if any.
How do they keep the buffalo at Raymond's Ranch on their ground?
Well, they are actually fenced in, but you know, the fence is similar to the fence you see up there, 4 or 5 wire fence, and it doesn't keep the buffalo in there. they can go out on occasion. In fact, you know, they can jump 6 feet without even harming the fence at all. So